Good morning and welcome to the Climate Summit. Thank you ever so much for registering and coming along first thing in the morning. I'm Claire O'Connor and I'm the chair of this morning's session. I'm Head of Policy, Performance, Analysis and Communications for Wandsworth Council, and I'm very lucky to have within my team officers working on climate change, who is one of the many actions they've been working on recently is this week's summit. This morning's session is on transport, and we'll be learning how to get around the borough sustainably, including the support and services available to residents and organisations. Our speakers, who we're really pleased to have with us today, are Councillor Locker, Cabinet Member for Strategic Planning and Transport, Margot Turner, Principal Transport Planner, and Jane Greatholder, Senior Transport Planner, Sam Merrison, who's our Road Safety Manager, James Beard, who's a Wandsworth resident and works for Climate Group, and Shane Rees from Ubitricity. The format of today's session is that we will start with each of our speakers, and then we'll have a question and answer where you can pose questions to our speakers. As we're in Teams Live, to ask questions, please type them into the chat on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll be picking questions at the end to ask, and we're expecting to be inundated with lots of questions. So if we group them together so that we can make sure that the topics are covered, please don't worry. We are taking a note of all the questions that are being asked. I should probably also be honest. Obviously, this is the first time we've run such a climate summit for our residents, and we're really pleased that so many of you have come along. But we've been quite ambitious about getting our speakers along today so we can get the maximum information to you. So it might mean that we're a little bit squeezed on the Q&A, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure we have as much time as possible for questions at the end. So at the end of today's event, please write your pledges in the chat. These are the changes you pledge to make as a result of today's session. We'll be publishing all the pledges from the summit on our council website at the end of the week. So thank you for joining us. We really hope you find this session useful. And I'd like to start by welcoming our first speaker, Councillor Locker.
Thank you for that, Ms. O'Connor. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Wandsworth is, hopefully, I think you'll agree, one of the most desirable and dynamic places to live and work in London. And it's experiencing growth and expansion and development. These factors place huge demands on our transport infrastructure, and the council's key transport challenge is to support transport capacity needed to drive that economic recovery, especially after COVID, regeneration and growth, whilst ensuring that transport is sustainable. That's why sustainable transport is one of the major themes of the Wandsworth Environment and Sustainability Strategy. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. I've gone to you. Road transport currently accounts for around a quarter of carbon emissions produced in Wandsworth, and diesel vehicles alone contribute more than any other source to air pollution in the local area. Across the UK, almost every sector except transport has reduced its carbon emissions over the past few years, but it's remained stubbornly difficult to reduce transport's carbon footprint. As a council and a borough, we are making and seeing changes that accelerate the shift to zero emissions transport. We work on the principle of a sustainable transport hierarchy, encouraging the most sustainable methods of transport, which hopefully you can see on the slide. The hierarchy is a generally agreed aspiration to prioritise active travel, so that's walking, cycling, over public transport and over private cars. And the diagram here shows the modes of transport with the most polluting towards the bottom. Our action plan is outcomes focused and concentrates on the best ways to reduce emissions, support local economies, promote health, well-being, safety and accessibility. This means we adopt innovative approaches to lessen the environmental and health impact of those modes of travel that are lower down in the hierarchy, as well as promoting those at the top. Many of you will have seen the Prime Minister yesterday unveil a 10-point plan for the net zero transition. This includes a ban on the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030. We need the infrastructure to adapt to that market shift. And as a council, we are already leading the field in providing the charging infrastructure that helps to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles, with more public charge points than any other local authority area. Ubitricity are going to explain more about public charging options during this session. As a council, we've also committed to removing fossil-fuelled vehicles from our entire fleet by 2030, and to work with our contractors to move to zero-emission vehicles as well. We've focused on promoting electric cargo bikes for businesses in the area, so you see e-bikes now feature in this hierarchy too. Our council officers are going to highlight some of the key work we're doing to improve our streetscape and infrastructure to make walking and cycling an everyday choice. So next slide, please. Whilst our population has grown, car ownership in Wandsworth has already fallen, and more journeys are now made by foot than any other mode of transport. You'll see this in the following presentation. However, we know that traffic volumes have risen this year, largely as a result of the pandemic. But it's also shown the vast potential to embrace new technology and working practices, rather like this, which may mitigate the need to travel and commute. As a result, we're encouraging our residents to keep shopping locally and to reduce the large deliveries from online shopping, support the local economy, and enable zero emissions journeys. We are currently reviewing and refreshing our Environment and Sustainability Action Plan to ensure it remains ambitious, reflects the latest innovation, and promotes the most sustainable modes of travel to drive down emissions across the whole borough. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, Councillor Locker. And now we're going to hear from Margot Turner and Jane Greatholder, who are going to talk about recent trends in travel behaviour in Wandsworth, the targets we're working to achieve, and provide a few examples of the projects that we're working on. So it's over to you, Jane and Margot. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Claire. As mentioned, my name is Margot Turner, and I am presenting today alongside my colleague Jane Greatholder. We're both transport planners within the council's transport strategy team. One of the major roles of our team is to develop the. Can I get the next slides, please? To develop the borough's transport strategy, which is complex. And next slide, please. And so I'm just going to go over a few of the basics of how we have developed the strategy and how it interacts with other boroughs and Transport for London. So in 2019, we developed a local implementation plan. It is our third local implementation plan as a borough. It follows 4 primary themes, which are changing the transport mix, healthy streets, which is considered a proper noun at the moment, and healthy people, a good public transport experience, and new homes and jobs. Under these themes, we have a headline mode share target, which I'll discuss in a moment, and this is supported by 9 transport outcomes, each with 1 to 3 supporting targets. So I'm not going to go into all of these because, as you can see, there are quite a few. I'm happy to answer questions on them later. But the overall timescales of the plan is a 25-year plan technically, but its timescales are to 2041. And we have some interim targets as well, many of which are sort of due in 2021 to 2024. Can I get the next slide, please? So our headline target is for mode share, which is to overall to increase the proportion of trips in the borough by residents of walking, cycling and public transport to 82% by 2041 from a baseline of 71%. If you do a quick math on the pie chart there, it actually totals 69% because it's 1 year more recent than the baseline, and it actually got slightly worse. But as Councillor Locker mentioned, walking is the most popular mode of transport in the borough, and this is supported by, if you add up all of the public transport things, it's about 1/3 of trips. And car, motorcycle and taxis are about 1/3 of trips, and then cycling is currently a small proportion, but obviously it varies by mode purpose. It's a much higher slice of commuting journeys. Next slide, please. I'm just going to talk about 2 of the outcomes that we're working towards, as Councillor Locker mentioned. One of them is reducing the road traffic volume. So this is a measurement of all vehicles on Wandsworth roads. As you can see, overall, since the year 2000, it has gone down considerably while population has increased. It has in the last few years started to increase again. There are various reasons for this, but if you look at the next slide, I'm going to make you swap back and forth a couple of times. So this is our car ownership slide. As again, you can see that the overall number of vehicles in the borough has decreased considerably over the last 20 years, despite considerable population increase. We do believe we're on track to hit our targets in early 2021. And so again, if you contrast that with the previous slide, so we know that population is increasing, car ownership is not. So why are we having this increase in trips? As mentioned, we think some of this is due to things like home deliveries, through traffic, other things like that, or perhaps people who own cars are using them more. We don't really know, but we're looking at various ways to address all of these different factors as part of our strategy. Okay, you can skip two slides ahead now. So every year we set a new program. We set a 3-year program with 1 year in firm. So the different things we try to balance as part of this program. We have a set budget that we get from Transport for London, and within this we do a balance of capital versus revenue funding, and make sure that the different projects we are funding help to achieve all 9 LIP outcomes, achieves a balance between the different modes that we're trying to support, namely walking, cycling, and public transport, that we have projects that affect all areas of the borough. And we also support the whole journey. So for things like cycling, that means we look at cycle parking as well as cycle lanes. Alongside this, we have some other programs, such as the Wandsworth Capital Programme, supplementary TfL programs, which at the moment mainly do things like support bus priority, help do some of the, sorry if there's screaming in the background, my son's about to go to nursery. And there's some supplementary TfL programs that support things like bus priority and cycle lanes. There's also some third-party funding opportunities that we work with. At the moment, this is mainly related to electric vehicles. And the final thing is developer obligations. So when a new building comes in, they'll often have to do some local improvements. And now I'm going to pass it on to Jane to talk about some of the examples.
Thanks, Margot. So having heard a bit about the objectives that we're working towards and our funding sources, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the projects and schemes that we're working on. And obviously in this won't cover everything that we're dealing with, and as Margot said, take questions. So next slide, please. So the first type of scheme I'm going to look at is one where streets are seen not just as a means of getting from A to B, but as public spaces to be enjoyed. This fits perfectly within the healthy streets approach, and particularly the criteria for having things to see and do, places to stop and rest, and places where people feel relaxed. And typical measures in this type of scheme would include reducing street clutter, improving the pavements, improving the crossing places, providing focal points, and providing trees and planting. This example is in Bellevue Road at Wandsworth Common, and there are other schemes following this approach across the borough in Battersea High Street, Putney High Street, Thrale Road and Southfields. Next slide, please. This is quite a different scheme in Queenstown Road. In fact, there are 2 schemes we're looking at here. The first, and the one we can see on the slide, is a temporary cycle lane that was introduced in response to COVID. And you can see that the cyclists are protected from the traffic by the little posts, the ones that have been installed. The second scheme, the permanent scheme, has been on our programme for a little while, and we've carried out a study of the whole of Queenstown Road and developed a range of proposals. We're now at the design phase for this scheme, and we're planning to consult in May to June of 2021. The project will include improved pedestrian crossings, improved pavements, improved bus stops, as well as segregated cycle lanes and general improvement of the street environment. Next slide, please. School streets are a relatively recent development. We started working with 5 schools in early 2019. A school street's essentially where a school is close to traffic at the beginning and end of the school day. This programme's been accelerated in response to COVID because, of course, as well as improving safety and making more pleasant environment outside the school gates, it's also really helpful for maintaining social distance. We've launched 19 school streets across the borough this year, and we've got a waiting list of schools that are keen to have their own school streets, and we've applied for more funding to be able to deliver these. Next slide, please. Oh, so I was expecting a picture of a bike hanger here. So this slide is about the bike hangers that we've installed in Wandsworth. Bike hangers provide secure and convenient cycle parking on residential streets. They can hold 6 bikes and take about half a car parking bay each. They're really useful for people living in flats or terraced houses where it would otherwise be tricky to store a bike. We've installed 21 across Wandsworth this year, and this map shows the locations of them. And we have requests for many more, and we've applied for more funding to be able to deliver those. So that's just a very quick run through of some of our schemes. And if you move on to the next slide, that's just our contact details if you have any questions about these. And that's all from us for now. I look forward to your questions later. Thank you.
Almost forgot to turn off mute there. Sorry about that, a bit early in the morning. So thank you so much, Jane and Margot. And now we're going to hear from Sam Merrison, who's our road safety manager, and he's going to highlight what the council offers to residents and businesses on sustainable travel with a focus on cycling. So over to you, Sam.
Morning. Yeah, sorry, just
Sorry, Sam is just getting his presentation up. So if you can just bear with me for a second, and we'll be with you. Won't be a second. And I think we're going to. You're live, Sam.
Okay, morning everybody. Sorry, I knew I was going to be the one to mess putting my slides up. So yeah, my name's Sam and I'm the road safety manager for the London Borough of Wandsworth, and we cover a kind of raft of schemes. So mainly it's around behaviour change. So when people hear road safety, actually our remit isn't so much with the engineering works and the highways. It's more about the people. So our work surrounds these kind of 3 strands of education, training and publicity. I think it's fair to say that we kind of cover all modes of transport, but the bulk of our work is very much with the next generation of road users, should I say. So we do a lot of work in schools, but having said that, we also work a lot with adults and all the way through as well. Obviously, over the last 20 years, a lot of road safety work has thankfully had to incorporate a lot of active travel work as a realistic life choice. And when we look at our training that we offer in a moment, we'll talk through that and how that we either deliver that in-house or work with other bodies to facilitate, and also our publicity campaigns as well. I thought just first off, it'd be good to show a good example of what we've done this year. It's been a obviously very odd and challenging year for all of us, and it's true to say that you know, for all of the obvious damage and hardship that COVID has caused and will continue to, it's also presented opportunities for active travel and the like that, you know, we've not seen before from a single event where for obvious reasons people have been turning to walking and cycling and reducing public transport. So building on a project that we've done with secondary schools, actually, where we'd taken abandoned bikes and kids had been building them and then getting them roadworthy, and then they'd undertake a little bit of training. We thought, well, actually, there's a real need at the local hospitals, especially during lockdown, where a lot of the frontline staff either needed new ways of getting to work, or perhaps they used to ride, had some old bikes in their sheds, didn't have bikes. We came across a few staff members that had them stolen recently. So using some abandoned bikes, we were able to get them reconditioned, donate them to the staff at the NHS, and also hold some public doctor bikes, obviously all socially distanced and with all the PPE where we needed to do that. But that went down really well, and we were able to donate you know, lots and lots of bikes to these staff members, and also help them with things like route planning. You know, a lot of these people hadn't cycled for a long time, or were maybe new to cycling but just didn't feel confident enough to use the public transport options. And obviously, if we can save those kinds of people from getting in a private motorised vehicle, then you know, that's a great thing for us as well. We were able to you know, deliver these doctor bikes for the staff as well, for their own bicycles that they needed doing up, and it was so successful that we've been invited back many times since, and they're trying to book us down for a kind of monthly slot at the moment, you know, resources allowing, but yeah, that was a really positive thing for us to be doing during the first lockdown. So what we offer, we deliver bikeability training. So bikeability is the national standard for cycle training. It's the brand for the what was, you know, previously known back when I was a child as cycling proficiency, but bikeability goes through a whole syllabus, and it was designed that no matter where you live in the country, you'll get the same kind of training, because it has to tightly follow the bikeability training syllabus. So our bread and butter is level 2 training that we do in schools. We do for year 6 children, and we're out every week of the school year delivering that kind of cycle training. It's a 4 or 5 day long course where we actually take the children out on their roads around their school, so local roads for them, so hopefully giving them a bit of confidence to ride those routes as well. Our level 3 training we don't do so much of because it's quite resource heavy. It tends to be one-to-one training, but both the level 2 and the level 3 training are obviously also available for adults. So the next strand is our adult one-to-one cycle training that we do an awful lot of as well. So again, you know, this year being the year it is, we've actually done record numbers in Wandsworth of our adult one-to-one cycle training, because there's just so many people that are, you know, keen to, you know, look at alternative modes of transport. So it's been great news for us in terms of that, and also some route planning as well to help people, because obviously there's a difference between teaching people how to ride a bike. There's teaching people how to be confident with their bicycle on the roads, but then there's also the challenge of actually people using their bicycles to make meaningful journeys, so their commute typically, yeah, we're available to help for route planning. Just some of the other brief things that we do within our schools. We do some practical pedestrian training for the younger children to try and give them the tools which they can pass on to their parents as well, for getting to and from school by walking. Scooter training similarly, you know, we've seen a massive increase in the number of scooters on the highways getting to and from school over the last decade, so we give some pointers on that. I've mentioned the doctor bikes that we did at the NHS sites. but also cycle maintenance courses. So where we've not been able to hold that kind of event during COVID, you know, actually cycling is to cycle maintenance is a huge part of cycling, and people can quite often get a puncture, which is fairly simple to fix, but if they don't know how to do it, their bike might end up in the shed for months rather than try and fix it themselves or take to a bike shop. And then just as an added on the bottom there, you can see motorbike and scooter advanced training vouchers. So although that's a motorised form of private vehicle, obviously they don't take up as much space and pollute as much as some of the larger vehicles, and there's been a huge increase in those kind of journeys as well. So we offer a TfL bike safe course that can be used with motorbikes and scooters. So that was in a nutshell the kind of the things that we offer, but obviously we work with partners, we work with all of the emergency services for various events and things like that. Obviously TfL as well, who fund the bulk of our schemes. And so on this slide you can see that there's some online things that TfL allow you to have a look on for cycle training, and the web address is at the top, but if you just Google TfL cycle skills you'll find it. And there's some online modules to go through. It's about tips to get you prepared for the road, how to start cycling on the road safely and responsibly, and then some tips to brush up on as well. The benefit of doing those is not just the knowledge that you get from it, but you also receive a 15% discount code from Halfords, who are the approved partner for Bikeability this year. And then lastly, our friends at the London Cycling Campaign. So the Wandsworth Cycling Campaign is an active group, but they've launched something called Cycle Buddies this year, and that it's basically an add-on from I guess cycle training, where cycle training teaches you how to cycle and various hints and tips and that kind of stuff. The Cycle Buddy scheme is a kind of great next phase, because what that actually does is, that's what it says on the tin, but you buddy up with somebody to make journeys, might be your commute, might be to the shops, that kind of thing, and it gives you a chance to stay active, but also allows you to look at making those journeys not just now but for the future as well. You know, I'm a typical person that cycled as a child. When I moved to London, I thought the roads looked a bit busy to me, but as soon as I was shown the way by a cycle instructor to do my route from home to work, that was kind of it. After that, you know, I've been a cyclist ever since. So yeah, it's a good scheme. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what we offer, and our things are on the website. So our things are open to schools, businesses, and local residents. So thank you very much.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you ever so much, Sam. That was really useful and full of really good hints and tips, which is what we're looking for. So now I'm going to hand over to James, who's going to give us an overview of the electric vehicles market and share insights in how businesses can adopt electric vehicles and also accelerate the transition to clean transport. Just bear with us while we do our transitions.
Thanks very much, Claire, and good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be joining you today live from my living room in Earlsfield. I want to say, first of all, I'm going to be focusing on electric vehicles here, but I am a big fan of sustainable transport more broadly. My bike and my feet are the main way that I get around the borough and get around London, and it's great to see the work that the council is doing in the presentations we've just seen, and how comprehensive that sustainable transport strategy is. So, my name's James. I'm a climate change campaigner focused on electric vehicles, and I work for a company called the Climate Group, and I work on an initiative called EV100. EV100 is a campaign that brings together businesses that are committing to switch over their company fleets to electric vehicles and to roll out EV charge points for their employees and for their customers across the company, all of that by 2030. Just to give you a few stats, in the UK, we have 30 businesses signed up to switch over 700,000 vehicles to electric and install EV charging at 1,200 locations up and down the country. Globally, we've got 92 members, 4.8 million vehicles switching over to zero emission vehicles, and 5,700 locations that are having EV charging installed. But numbers, I think, are just half the story. It's much more interesting to hear from the people that actually drive and charge up these vehicles. So we've got a little video here that does exactly that, that we published yesterday. So yeah, look forward to showing you this now.
Hi, my name's Ken Locke. I work in the tree cutting team as part of SSEN's Highlands and Islands region.
My name's Karen Markey, I'm Operations Director for Mighty.
I'm Mark Marrison, I'm a Senior Engineer for OpenReach.
Hi, I'm Lucy Simpson, I work for Centrica Business Solutions.
Hi, I'm Dan Beresford, Team Manager down here in the Worcester area at Severn Trent Water.
Hi, my name is Sonny, I'm a Fabric Engineer here at Heathrow.
Hello, my name's Chris Jackson and I work for Centrica.
Hi, my name's Ben, I'm an Electrical Engineer working at Heathrow Airport.
My name is Oliver Mould and I'm a Senior Product Owner in Digital at BT.
My name's Balby Singram, I work for OpenReach, my colleagues call me Bally.
My favourite thing about driving an EV is the technology. The car certainly is a head turner.
I like how simple they are to drive. I like that they're quiet so you can leave early in the morning to see your neighbours, which is good.
And the vehicle itself has been very user friendly and the comfort and the reliability of the vehicle has been very good. This van so far is a winner for us and we're very pleased to have it in this team.
The power that you get out of it, like there's nothing quite like it.
So they're quiet, smooth, safe, cheap to run, performance is great, and they've got brilliant technology.
I feel that myself and the others are pioneers.
My area covers East Midlands, East Anglia, right out to Norfolk coast. It's a very rural area, so when I was told my new vehicle was going to be all electric, I was a tad hesitant.
Had some reservations when I first took delivery of the EV. I think it's range anxiety, which a lot of people have, and the superchargers around the UK certainly do help, and I think there's more and more of those being installed each month.
I didn't think it would be powerful enough as the diesel or the petrol cars, but it's a lot better than the diesel or petrol, so power's there.
A big part of my work is supporting our British gas fleet in how they can charge en route when the engineers are out and about in an affordable way.
Over the last 8 months, there's vast improvements in the amount of charging points around the Highlands. They're popping up everywhere now.
It's no different to any other petrol or diesel automatic vehicle. I'm actually quite proud driving the van that it says zero emissions electric vehicle. I was granddad a year ago on Wednesday to my lovely granddaughter, and that sort of pushes me further to do our bit for the planet so that her future is brighter, safer and altogether better.
Anything that saves the planet is good.
It's important that we all play our part.
We've got to make a change now for the future.
Because we've all suffered from breathing in the kind of pollution you can see, smell and taste for far too long.
Setting down some foundations for our kids and their future. So anyway, it's been lovely talking to you. I've got to shoot, going to get to my next job. Take care, hope to speak to you soon. See ya.
There we go. Hope you enjoyed that. So we published that video yesterday to coincide with the government's announcement of moving to 100% electric vehicle sales by 2030, which Councillor Locker mentioned earlier, which we're really pleased about and happy to take any questions about that later. So first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about why we work with businesses to drive this transition. Very simply, 60% of new cars and almost all new vans and trucks on the road in the UK are bought by businesses. So if we want to change the types of vehicles that are on the roads, it makes sense to start with that really large part of the market. And secondly, businesses tend to take a long-term view when it comes to their vehicle fleets. They think in terms of what's called total cost of ownership. What that means is they can afford to buy electric vehicles, which at the moment are more expensive to buy up front, but because they make major savings on fuel, electricity being much cheaper than petrol and diesel, and they make major savings on maintenance because there are fewer moving parts and no internal combustion engine, which is actually creating a series of controlled explosions inside your car. Because there isn't any of that, there's much less maintenance costs as well. So they can actually invest up front and recoup those savings over time. And when car companies see that there is, all these companies around the world that want to buy 5 million electric vehicles, that makes them go, aha, okay, that petrol car we were about to make, maybe we shouldn't, maybe we should make an electric car instead. And the more car companies that start thinking like that, start investing in electric cars, that increases competition and that drives down prices for everyone. Then once these businesses are finished with their vehicles, which is usually between 3 to 5 years, they go into the second-hand market where they're much cheaper, and then that's where most of us buy our vehicles. So that's another way that it helps with making electric driving easier and more affordable for all of us. The other thing that businesses can do that really helps is rolling out charge points for their employees and for their customers. This is really important for people like me who live in terraced housing and cannot install EV chargers at home. We need to be able to charge somewhere. Charging at your workplace or places like shopping centres, supermarkets, hotels, etc. is really, really helpful. So for an example of that, Southside Shopping Centre is Landsec is one of our EV 100 members, which is why they have rolled out EV charging to make it easier for people to get to the shopping centre in their EV, do their shopping, come out, their EV is charged up, and then they can drive back home. So I'll just close by saying I'd really encourage everyone listening to ask the company that you work for or ask the shops, the shopping centres, supermarkets that you visit to join EV 100, to switch over their fleets and to roll out EV charging. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, James. And now we're going to hear from Shane, who's going to also talk about the benefits of switching to an electric vehicle and also how the EV charging infrastructure in towns and cities supports that shift. So we're going to go over to you now, Shane. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Claire. Right, so hi everyone, I'm Shane Rees. I work at Ubitricity. Today I'm going to share a few insights about electric vehicle charging, what that's like for drivers, and how this fits into the wider transport strategy. Yep.
Sorry, just wait for a second. People can see me but hear your voice, so just hold for a second so they can see your screen. You should see the red box go in a sec.
Okay.
You're okay.
All right, we're all good. Okay, so in case you didn't catch that, I'm Shane. I work at Ubitricity. I look after the sales and marketing here for Ubitricity in the UK. And I'm just going to share a few insights around electric vehicle charging, what that looks like for drivers, and how this fits into the wider transport strategies for councils. So you're probably wondering, who is Ubitricity? So we have nothing to do with these guys. No relation. If it sounds like we are, just blame my accent. Although thinking of Uber, more and more of their taxi drivers are switching to electric vehicles, and they're starting to plug into Ubitricity daily, because with the advent of the ultra low emission zone expanding out to from the very central part of London where it is right now, they're going to want to drive electric cars to avoid those costs and start every day with and every shift with a full battery. So we're a charge point operator. we make and operate our own charge points. And what makes us different is we specialize in making these ones which fit inside lampposts. What's so great about putting a charge point inside a lamppost? Well, those lampposts, using those lampposts to house and power EV charge points is a really quick, low cost, future thinking and environmentally friendly way to help people without driveways to charge their electric cars and vans at home. And what's so great about that? Well, as you might have seen yesterday, the government confirmed that they're bringing in a ban of new sales of diesel and electric cars from 2030. So sooner or later, we're all going to be driving or riding in electric cars. In fact, the predictions are that EVs should rise from about 1% of the vehicles on our roads today, which is a little over 300,000 cars, to about 30% of vehicles on the road by 2030. So that ramp up is starting now. So by 2030, we should have around 11 million cars and light vans on the roads, and that means we're going to need a whole lot more public charge points. And the issue of public charge points is a really big one, because it's one of the biggest issues that holds people back from making the switch from their combustion cars to electric ones. These are some findings from a recent YouGov survey where they surveyed people right across Europe, and it highlights the biggest concern that's holding people back is that limited availability of charging points. And what we found is that once people know that they can charge at home overnight, while they're enjoying the evening or sleeping, that this form of charging will cover around 90% of their mileage. And if you know you can access those types of charge points, then much of that worry and concern just disappears. In fact, if you can charge overnight at home, it makes refueling an electric car easier and faster than a combustion car, because it takes less than a minute to plug in your car and start a charge. The problem is that most people think you need a driveway or a garage to charge at home. So what if you park in the street? These are some of the things that we've seen of people taking matters into their own hands because they can't charge at home overnight because there aren't the local charging facilities. So quite enterprising. But these sort of Heath Robinson home charging solutions come with a whole range of health and safety issues, not just trip hazards, but electrical safety issues. So if the street is your driveway in Wandsworth, we think the lamppost can be your home charge point. And so let's take a look at Wandsworth. What's the situation like in Wandsworth? Well, 3/4 of households in Wandsworth, that's about 86,000 households, don't have driveways. They don't have off-street parking. Fortunately, you happen to live in the borough, which is the leading council in providing an EV charging amenity for these residents. And when I say leading council, I mean every council, including counties. At the end of October, there were 591 charge points, public charge points in the borough, and that's more public charge points than any county in England, Scotland, or Wales. And it means that 65% of those houses without off-street parking are now within a 5-minute walk of a public charge point. Just under 400 of those public charge points are provided by Ubertricity. And that's nearly double the 220 that were in place as we came out of lockdown in June. And the residents of Wandsworth are going to see this number grow by roughly the same number again to around 600 over the next 4 to 5 months. What's that doing in terms of reducing emissions and pollution within the borough? Well, in October alone, these 400 charge points supplied enough electric fuel to EV cars to cover around 81,000 miles of emissions-free driving, all by Wandsworth residents. If you want to know where that happens, well, this is the most popular one, the most popular charge point in October. That was in Fruin Road in SW18, just south and west of Clapham Common, I think. So that was used 39 times in October and had an EV plugged into it for a total of 18 days, 3 hours and 11 minutes. And that one charge point delivered enough electricity to power 2,000 miles of emissions-free driving. Where does most of the charging happen within Wandsworth on our network? Well, hopefully you can just about make that out, but it's just to the south and west of Clapham Common. where do we expect charging to grow? Well, this is the area just north of Clapham Common. I think what this sort of highlights is how easy this makes lamppost charging makes to roll out EV charging for neighbourhoods. So if you're a resident of that particular neighbourhood, you know now that if you switch to an electric car, you will be able to charge it overnight outside your home, because there are charge points within reach of pretty much wherever you park. So I guess that begs the question of really, that's fantastic, but why are our councils and Wandsworth in particular investing in this on their own? Well, there's two really good reasons for that. One is pollution, which affects our health, and the other is climate change. And as Councillor Locker said right at the beginning, these are really hard to reduce from road transport. So lockdown gave us a really interesting experiment about if we take cars off the road entirely through sort of like a nationwide house arrest, it makes a big difference to the amount of pollution, both in particulates and carbon emissions coming from road transport. And these have real consequences for our health and well-being. And if you watch this chart, you'll see how carbon emissions fell as various countries entered different states of lockdown over the first half of the year, and then how those emissions rebounded as nations came back out of those states of lockdown. So really what we're looking for is, instead of trying to keep everyone under a state of house arrest, is structural change to our transport. And sort of Councillor Lockett, I think, showed this chart, or a version of this chart. This is from the Energy Saving Trust in Scotland, and sort of puts those different transport choices that we have in some sort of priority. And I think so there's personal choices we make, but for some of us, we use our cars and our vans as part of our vocation. And so we rely on those. So, if you're a taxi driver, you're going to need to carry on driving a taxi. If you're a delivery driver or a tradesman who needs to carry their tools around in their van, driving an electric car or an electric van is a better option for you than a combustion one. And by making it easy for people to charge, we can get everyone involved in making the shift to cleaner vehicles. Fortunately, councils don't have to do everything on their own. There are different types of charging. This is where most of the charging is going to happen. It's when people have parked up for long periods of time and are doing something else than sitting and waiting for their car to charge. And most of these groups, so if you so businesses can get discounts or subsidies for to make putting in charge points cheaper for them, and if you have a driveway, you can apply for a home grant as well. But if you park in the street, really it's the council who has to do that for you, because the public highway is the council's property or responsibility, and there is a subsidy scheme for that councils can access to pick up the lion's share of this cost. To make that more affordable. I would say that this year we've seen council budgets stretched massively in response to their COVID-19 response programs. So it's a really tricky balancing act. But we think that lamppost charging is a really good option for boroughs across London and council areas across the UK, because it works. It's a very cheap way to install charge points, and it works quite sensitively to both the streetscape. It doesn't take up a lot of extra space. The energy system, it means that charging your electric car can work quite sensitively with the way that renewable energy is generated and when there's less demand on the grid, and also people's lifestyles, because you can charge overnight while you're enjoying your evening or sleeping. So I'm going to leave it there and give us some time for questions. Thanks very much.
Thank you ever so much, Shane. So now we're going to go on to the question and answers. We've got about 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask our panelists to try and keep their answers short and succinct so we can get through as many questions as possible. And if we don't get through all the questions, what we'll do is we will post kind of a roundup of the questions and themes alongside all the information from the summit, so they'll be available for you as residents. So the first question is to Councillor Locker, and the question is, what are the lessons learned from the introduction and suspension of the LTNs? What are the Council's plans for consultation and dialogue with residents? And what are the plans for LTNs now?
Okay, thank you. And thank you to all. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And thank you to all of the presenters today. I think it's been really informative. I've very much enjoyed watching all your presentations and listening to the advice and tips that you've been giving. So thank you for contributing. On low traffic neighbourhood, everyone will know that we tried a number of schemes as a trial and suspended those in September following a director review and some concerns about how they were working. Since then, we've been carrying out a review and we've been discussing it at the Council's Transport Committee. And I think a number of key lessons are emerging. I think the first one is just about scale and introducing everything in one go. So we had a number of schemes, particularly interacting with the A24, which was also going through a number of changes that were being managed by TfL. And I think one of the things that we've learned is that we need to look more about the interactions of different schemes and what the results of those are. And bear in mind that, you know, right now, this summer and this year has been incredibly sort of difficult for a lot of people with COVID and lockdowns stopping and starting, etc. And there's also been a great deal of change and a great deal of pressure on London's transport network. We've seen major bridges out of action. We've seen a dramatic drop in the use of public transport by, you know, about 80% or more. So it's been very hard to try and even get a baseline for what the sort of regular traffic flows are. And with that in mind, I think we need to be really careful and think about the interactions of scheme and the scale of schemes. I think the second point is about the design, and I think we've learned some valuable lessons about the design. It's also clear that as well, Transport for London have been changing the way that they have been thinking. So initially, when we were looking at low traffic neighbourhoods, for instance, the idea was that no one would use camera enforcement. And I think the views on that have changed, and that gives a bit more flexibility. And we've been looking at using ANPR cameras, I think they're called, which is automatic number plate recognition cameras, when we've been implementing school streets. So we'll be testing that out, but that certainly gives us a lot more options than always having to use physical hard roadblocks. And I think the most important thing, and this comes on to how we handle things going forward, is about engagement. So in the summer, we were working to very tight timescales, as were a lot of boroughs across London. And there's inevitably been issues with that because you don't quite have time to test things out and to get full engagement with your residents. So one of the things that the committee has decided is that in future, when we go back and look at schemes and start to talk about implementing traffic schemes in different areas, that we'll go through a consultation process. And I think that's right. I think it's right to give people the chance to comment on designs, to feedback on designs before they're taken to a committee for a decision so that everyone can see it's going through a democratic process. And I think that was one of the things that actually Waltham Forest did, because Waltham Forest is often highlighted as one of the really good examples of where LTNs were introduced. They also had the time to do that groundwork and go through the consultation and engagement process. Which I think what we've learned from this summer is that that's really important. It's very hard to just implement things in one go in a big bang, particularly during a pandemic, and expect it all to work and expect it all to be accepted by residents and businesses. And fundamentally, we have to remember that when we're talking about modal change, that requires behavioural change from individuals, and we're going to have a much better chance, I think, of getting sustainable and durable change in people's behaviours if we take them along the journey with us. So I appreciate it takes a bit longer, appreciate it's a lot more work, but I think that's the way that we should go going forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And then our next question is for James, and then also Shane, do chip in as well at the end. So James, what incentives are there to use electric vehicles, and can petrol and diesel vehicles be adapted to electric if they are not disposed of by 2030?
Thank you, Claire. I think there's a couple of points to pick up there. Firstly, around cost and incentives, and secondly, around the existing petrol and diesel vehicles. So firstly, on incentives, yes, there are. Shane mentioned these. There are grants from government to support both the purchase of the vehicles themselves and also the purchase of the charge points that go with them. And these are actually applied at the point of sale. So you don't actually need to worry as the consumer about any of this. It's all taken care of by the car dealership. And that includes the charge point side of things as well. And the government did actually announce additional funding for those grants yesterday, so those will be continuing. But a wider point on cost, the cost of electric vehicle batteries has fallen by about 90% over the past decade, and that trend is going to continue into the next decade. And mainstream credible analysts are forecasting that electric vehicles will be cheaper to buy up front than petrol and diesel vehicles by around 2025, maybe even as early as 2022 for some parts of the market. And as I say, they're already cheaper to run because electricity is cheaper than fuel and they don't need as much fixing. So I think it's really important to bear that in mind. They are a little bit pricier at the moment, but by 2030, that will certainly not be the case anymore. And indeed, at the moment, a lot of people buy vehicles on PCP, what's called PCP leasing, and that sort of combines the upfront cost and the ongoing running costs. And some of those are already working out cheaper than the equivalent lease for petrol and diesel vehicles today. Speaking of petrol and diesel vehicles, really important to stress, they are not being taken off anyone in 2030. What 2030 is about is the sale of new conventional petrol and diesel vehicles. So they're not being taken off you. Just, that point about disposal, that's not what's happening. It is possible. There are some companies that can retrofit an electric motor into an existing vehicle, but I think that's probably going to be relatively niche. We're seeing massive investment now from all the car companies. Going to see about 500 models of electric vehicle available in the next couple of years. And what they're starting to do is really build EVs from the ground up as EVs. So not just take their existing products and stick a motor in, but design them from the ground up to really maximize the performance and minimize the cost. So I think that's what's going to be really exciting.
Thank you so much, James. Our next question is for Margot and Jay. We've had several questions on electric bikes and e-cargo bikes. What is the council doing to provide e-cargo bike delivery schemes to support local businesses and support e-bikes for older residents and commuters? And also there's a secondary point, which I'll pick up with Shane in a minute. So Margot and Jane, that's for you.
Thanks, Claire. It's a couple of different responses really to this. We are doing sort of a variety of things to help both businesses and residents improve access to e-bikes and e-cargo bikes. Recently, about the beginning of the year pre-COVID, we put in a successful application to the Department for Transport and acquired 13 e-cargo bikes for both teams within the council and local organisations, and those bikes have now been delivered and are in use. We're currently looking at trying to acquire some more funding to help businesses acquire e-cargo bikes. We've also done a soft launch of something called Pedal My Wheels within the borough. A soft launch because Pedal My Wheels is essentially a company that helps residents to purchase a bike. And we have worked with them to ensure that residents have access to cargo bikes and e-bikes through the scheme. We've done a soft launch of it because it includes an element of cycle training, which we haven't been able to do through the pandemic, but it is available to residents, and we hope to be able to promote it more when we're able to sort of include the cycle training element. It enables people to purchase a bike for a monthly cost, essentially a rent-to-own scheme, and if you don't like the bike after a month, you can return it. So we're really pleased to be able to introduce that, particularly because things like cargo bikes and e-cargo bikes can be very expensive. and difficult to find, particularly these days. So we're pleased to be able to offer that. Is that pretty much cover everything? Okay.
Thank you so much, Margot. I've just got a quick question. I think I'm going to go to Shane on this one, but James, chip in as well if you want to. It's if all cars are electric, won't this be a huge drain on the national grid?
Alrighty. Yeah, so there's a really good program. There was a really good segment from Top Gear recently interviewing a chap called Graham Cooper, who works at National Grid. And his view is no, there's plenty of capacity within the National Grid to accommodate the charging of electric vehicles, especially if we encourage those EVs to charge at night when demand on the grid is very low. And in fact, sometimes we have to turn off wind farms because there's too much power coming onto the grid. So rather than being a strain on the grid, if we manage charging in the right way and get people, the roads and the energy system working together, it can actually support, EVs can be a support to the grid and encourage an even lower carbon and more renewable based electricity system. So yeah, no, it's all possible.
Thank you so much, Shane, and thank you for your succinct answer. That's awesome. So we've got a chance for one last question, which I appreciate we're running slightly over, but we just want to fit this one in. And as I said, we'll do a roundup of the questions and publish them on our website when the summit's finished. So we're going back over to Margot, and the question for Margot is reducing street parking the best way to reduce car ownership? And what are the longer term plans to enable active travel?
Thank you, Claire. In many ways, the answer is yes, but it's not necessarily street parking. So one of the main drivers of population growth in Wandsworth has been new developments. And when planning applications are put in for new developments or conversions of houses to flats, one of the things that is often associated with that is a lack of car parking. So a lot of new blocks of flats either have very low ratios of flats to car parking spaces, or if it's a conversion, it'll come with the caveat that residents do not have the ability to apply for an on-street car parking permit. So those things combined mean that there's actually fewer and fewer residents in the borough that are actually able to acquire a street parking permit than there were 10, 20 years ago. And this has been a policy that's been adopted London-wide, and it's particularly effective in areas with high access to public transport. So if a site is located in a part of the borough, such as Roehampton, where there's less access to public transport, will generally allow more car parking to be provided as part of a development, as opposed to something sort of, in Earlsfield or Wandsworth or Vauxhall Nine Elms. We don't have a policy of overall reducing access to street parking to existing residents. We do, whittle away at it, sort of take out a spot here or there as part of a longer, a wider scheme, such as, putting in the bike hangers is a good example. A lot of those have replaced a car parking space. We're looking to introduce more bike hangers, and those will remove car parking spaces. When we do look at any scheme that reduces car parking, we obviously consult with residents, and we look at how well utilized street parking is in that area. In terms of sort of longer term plans to support active travel, the biggest thing we're doing right now is looking at putting in some fairly major, really high quality cycle lanes that will encourage more people to cycle, and those who do cycle to hopefully cycle for more trips than they do now.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Margot. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to bring the event to a close today. I hope you found it really, really useful. I think we had a lot of range and tips there. So if you'd like to just add your pledges to the chat, as I said, we'll be publishing those on our website as well. Thank you ever so much for joining us in the morning, and a big thank you as well to all of our speakers. So have a good rest of the day. Thank you.